Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, as usual, Cole Anderson. And before I get into the main content from my video, I do want to invite all of my viewers out there to a solo recital I will be giving at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time on November the 5th in Caroline Hume Recital Hall at San Francisco Conservatory. It's my very first time playing there, so I'm excited to be able to try the space out, and I have an interesting program of works planned, which I'll be sharing with you in a later video. So if you happen to be in the Bay Area on November 5th, feel free to come out for the concert. It's free to the public, so you can just drop by, and I will be live streaming it as well and posting it on the channel. So I've gotten many requests to play some music by Scriabin since I started this channel. Actually, Scriabin himself was online, as you can see, asking for some love for his music on this channel. So this is for you, Mr. Scriabin. It's actually pretty strange that I haven't gotten to any Scriabin yet. His music is a great love of mine. When I was a teenager, his Fifth Sonata was actually one of my war horses that I used to play all the time. People got pretty sick of it, probably. And I even won a small competition once upon a time with that piece. That was back when I used to play in competitions. But I've always loved his music and been really attracted to it from the very beginning. I love how wild and totally original it is. It has this kind of unashamedly sensual quality to it, and at the same time, a very potent exoticism and mysticism. Also, just intellectually, I really admire how Scriabin developed his own unique non-tonal musical language in his later career as kind of a vehicle for his ideas. And of course, his ideas were pretty esoteric in general. So this musical language, it was largely based around quartal harmonies, or chords built up largely from fourths or sometimes fifths with prominent tritones, especially near the bass voice. Although non-tonal, he definitely did use centricity, so it wasn't total pantonality like Schoenberg. He would have a piece revolving around a certain keynote, but he wouldn't use tonal harmonic progressions to establish that keynote. He replaced them with something else. And it's really as unique a musical voice as any of the other languages that were being created as responses to typical Western tonality at that time. We usually give much more credit to characters like Debussy or Schoenberg or Bartók, Stravinsky. But someone like Scriabin and also another figure like Ferruccio Busoni were coming up with very original languages that actually have been quite influential in their own way. Scriabin was maybe one of the most forward-looking of all the Russian composers of his generation. Probably his actual genuine musical accomplishments are a little overshadowed by his dottiness. He went a little crazy towards the end of his life. He was convinced that he was the Messiah and that the beginning of World War I was going to usher in an apocalypse in which he would lead humanity to a higher level of existence. So, yeah, all that in between his usual compositional activities and performing activities. So it must have surprised him, I guess, when he died right around that time. So anyway, today's little miniature is from an earlier part of his career. This is before he really got off onto all this crazy stuff. He was still in his Chopin/Wagner phase at this point. Those were his two great inspirations in his earlier years. This is also a wonderful and very accessible example of a somewhat arcane genre. There's a fairly small repertoire of pieces written for the left hand alone, and this is a prime and great example. At first glance, this whole notion of writing for one hand may seem kind of a bit eccentric, kind of a stunt, which it is. I mean, sometimes it was really motivated by necessity. There were pianists who had lost their right arms or who couldn't use their right hand for whatever reason. So there were pieces written for that purpose. In fact, Scriabin wrote this particular piece after he had injured his right hand practicing Liszt's Don Juan fantasy. So he was at a little bit of a loss of what to do. He was doing a lot of left hand practicing, and he just wrote these compositions, the Prelude and then also the Nocturne, Opus 9, for the left hand alone. Beyond just necessity or kind of a stunt, there's actually a logical underpinning to the whole idea. It makes much more sense to write a piece for the left hand alone than to write one for the right hand alone. And at first glance, that may seem strange. You would think the left hand would be ill-suited to having all the musical material foisted on it. Usually, pianists complain about their left hand being weaker than their right hand because the right hand is always taking the melodic material. The more difficult passages are usually written for the right hand. Actually, for precisely that reason, the right hand oftentimes has more tension in it. If people get tendinitis and other difficulties, it usually focuses on the right hand, although not always. But the left hand is actually, for that very reason, a little bit more relaxed, tends to be more relaxed in its usage, and in fact, more naturally suited to playing the piano, just from the way the piano is set up. If you just consider how the left hand interacts with the keyboard, the strongest finger, the thumb, is on top, taking the melody notes, as well as the upper notes in chords and double notes. So it's very effortless for the left hand to voice melodies, shape things, get the right kind of voicing in chords. As I mentioned, it requires far less muscular tension and exertion than what you have to do with the right hand. In the right hand, you're always battling the fact that your smallest finger, the fifth finger, takes the brunt of all the work in technical passages and in voicing melodies and the high notes of chords. So this kind of ease and relaxation, it actually moves into your whole body when you play a piece for the left hand alone, and it's actually very enjoyable and very relaxing is the only word I can find for it. Of course, left-hand pieces also have the added benefit of developing impressive strength and agility in your left hand, and really developing all the sort of qualities that pianists usually take for granted in their right hands. The ability to voice melodies and do a complicated filigree and the like. But, we usually don't develop that to the same degree in the left hand. There's just not as much of an opportunity. So if you look at the repertoire of left hand alone pieces, which is, again, not large, they can be written on one staff. Many of Godofsky's Chopin studies are written on one staff, actually, for the left hand. They can also be written on two, as this piece is. With pieces like this, it can actually be useful to practice a little bit with two hands to kind of clarify what your natural musical approach would be, and then you can imitate that with the left hand by itself. It kind of helps to overcome the basic awkwardness of figuring this thing out, of doing everything with your left hand. So Scriabin, he's a very successful composer for the left hand alone. He goes out of his way, like any composer in this situation, to disguise this limitation and to give the impression that two hands are actually playing at all times. So let's look at least one way that he does this. In the opening bars, the left hand plays a melody with chordal accompaniment, and immediately after the second downbeat, the left hand has to leap down and with the greatest possible agility just play this bass line. And this is far trickier than you'd think because you need to maintain the chord still. You pretty much have to play the bass line with only one finger, the fifth finger, the pedal providing the legato. This is extraordinarily tricky to carry off without accidentally bumping one of the notes and making it much louder than the others. So it requires a very finely tuned technique and a lot of painstaking practice to make this sound smooth. But the result, when you carry it off well, is very convincing. It sounds like two hands. So in general, this idea of covering as much range as possible with the left hand is a major technique in making this sound convincing. So the left hand has to be very agile, jumping around from the bass up to the treble and back. You'll notice another technique that Scriabin uses to give the illusion of a fullness of texture that you would get with two hands. He uses this dotted rhythm here, a double dotted 8th and 32nd note. And because this doesn't line up with the left hand note, the 16th note there, it gives the passage a much more complex sound. So just compare it if he used a much more plain rhythm with a dotted 8th and 16th. So again, going back to the dotted rhythm. It does sound much more refined, much more complex. And in this case, Scriabin goes further. He uses this rhythmic peculiarity also as part of the structure of the melody. So in the main theme, we always get an alternation. First a dotted 8th and 16th, then a double dotted 8th and 32nd. So it's actually becomes a very interesting musical idea as well. So the whole idea of playing a piece with the left hand alone may seem kind of imposing, but once you do it, you realize actually how possible it is, and also how kind of soothing it actually is. You know, your left hand, again, requires far less tension actually to do these things. One small note about this piece: if you have small hands, it might look like some parts of this are impossible. There are some ninths and tenths between the highest and the lowest note fairly often. Most people can reach a ninth, but some of the tenth reaches are even a stretch for me, and I've got a pretty big hand. However, Scriabin himself, I think, actually had a pretty small hand, so I'm imagining that he actually intended you to freely arpeggiate some of those large jumps. So as long as you can get the ninth interval without rolling, you should be fine for the whole piece. And if it is a little too much to do with the left hand alone, it's still a really fun piece to play with two hands too. So you can just do that. There's no competition after all for doing it with the left hand alone. So thanks very much for watching. Please stay tuned for the complete performance. Please also support the channel if you can. Hit the like button and the subscribe button. You can financially support the channel at www.patreon.com. Otherwise, though, just stay tuned, and next week we'll have some more great music for you. Until then, take care.